Oh, hi. I'm Edward Funk, and this is podcast number 82. The title is Loretta Young Tells Her Husband That She's Not Going to Be His Slavey Housewife. Okay, now we'll get into more about Loretta Young's marital woes, but first, an anecdote uh, about the household being robbed by the notorious burglar whom the press had named Raffles. Loretta recalled. The Arthur Rubinsteins gave a big dinner party that night. Irene Selznick, daughter of L.B. Mayer and wife of David Selznick, had on a gorgeous diamond bracelet. My guess is that it'd be worth about $500,000 in today's market. I said to her, "What is that?" She said, "Well, it's my consolation prize from David. She and David had just separated." I said, "Oh, Irene, it's beautiful." She said, "Well, I'd rather have David," and dismissed it as if it were nothing. A little sidebar here. He left her for the actress Jennifer Jones. Um, well, I'll continue. Um, she dismissed it as if for nothing. So kiddingly, I said, "Well, if you hate it so, let me wear it for tonight." To my surprise, she took it off her wrist and put it on mine and said, "Enjoy." I flashed it all over the party. I'd forgotten all about the gorgeous bracelet when it was time to go home, and we were halfway down the driveway when Tom, that's Loretta's husband, said, "Oh, Lord, you've got Irene's bracelet on. We've got to take it back." I said, "Oh, I don't want to go back there. Say goodnight all over again to everybody. I'll send it over in the morning." He said, "No, give it to me, and I'll take it back." So I took it off, and he took it back and gave it to her. Now, that night, Raffles broke into our house, and he would have gotten that bracelet. We were asleep when he came in. He had climbed up the side of the trellis that went into my sitting room and right into the safe and closets. He went into the drawers in my dressing room where I used to put good stuff and junk together. When I got up in the morning, I didn't notice one thing out of place. And it was Sunday morning. I was getting ready, getting dressed to go to Mass. The maid came in to get a coat out of the closet that I wanted to wear. She came back from the fur closet and said, "Mrs. Lewis, you better come in here." So I went in, and the coat on me was gone. The nutria, the one I wanted to wear, was gone as well. I don't know why he took that because there was a full like fox coat right next to it and a brown mink coat next to that. He probably could only handle so much. The reason the reason I wanted to put this in a podcast is, could you imagine anyone having so many mink coats? This is a different time. We're back in the 40s. We learned later how we knew our home so well. This good-looking young man had come to the door several months earlier and presented a card to our housekeeper. He said that he was from a real estate office and that, um, let me hold on, I turn the pages correctly. That he's from a real estate company and that Mr. Lewis had asked him to appraise the property. So the housekeeper showed him everything, including the alarm system. A robbery notwithstanding, Loretta professionally was at an apex, but there'd be a price to pay. Just what the price until would soon become clearer. Loretta remembered picking up the phone one day. It was Malcolm Smith, a friend from New York, and he said, "Oh, Loretta, I'm so thrilled. We just got your house. We're going to love living in it." I was dead silent. He said, "Well, you know we bought your house, don't you?" Oh, yes, I do," I replied. And of course, I didn't know it at all. I said to Tom when he came home, "Malcolm Smith called and said he bought this house." Tom said, "Yes." And I asked why. "We just finished it. We spent a year and a half getting it just the way we want it." He said, "Well, if anything happened to you, I couldn't afford to keep it up." I said, well, what's going to happen to me? He just looked at me. I said, Tom, you've done this before. When we were in the little house on Camden, you couldn't wait to get out of that. Now we're settled here, and you can't wait to get out of this. Quite possibly, hold on, dabbling in real estate gave Tom a focus, at least for a short term. Countess Estelle Doheny into renting her home on the Doheny Ranch for $1,500 per month. The Dohenys had built a fortune on oil and were one of Los Angeles' wealthiest families. I'm going to go off on a tangent here. The Doheny that became so rich with oil, one day he noticed some guy was delivering sod somewhere in Los Angeles, and he actually saw that oil was dripping from the sod. So then he went and started property there and all the way around it, and that's how he got started, big in the oil business. Okay, back to the story. Now, on the Doheny property, there were 3 homes on their 410-acre ranch perched in the hills of Beverly Hills. Can you imagine that? 410 acres, Beverly Hills. And this was what? 50 years ago. Loretta recalled, no, it's more like 70 years ago. Loretta recalled, our house was on a knoll, and you had to drive 2 blocks from the gate to get there. We shared a swimming pool, and Larry Doheny and his family shared the pool and a tennis court. And Loretta said the Lewises really didn't use the tennis court. The house was absolutely beautiful. It was an old home, and Countess Doheny had combined several small rooms into one great living room with a huge fireplace and an expansive bay window looking out into the garden. It had 6 family bedrooms and 4 servant rooms, and it was really a marvelous house. Though considerably smaller than the Carolwood house, a staff consisting of a housekeeper, a downstairs maid, a personal maid, a butler, and a governess was required. Now, we were referring to Countess Doheny. So ask yourself, why is she a countess? Well, I'm not sure of this, but I'm pretty sure of this. The Catholic Church, since even today still has a Vatican state. If you do the right things, meaning donate the right money, you can become a countess. And I'm pretty sure that's how she became Countess Doheny. Okay. It wasn't an easy time for Tom. The war had been over for 4 years, and unlike his previous track record, he hadn't slipped into a slot that was propelling him upward. The glory days of Colonel Tom were behind him, just as, glory days were fading, just as Loretta's stature only increased. She was making the movies she wanted to make, and the movies she made money. The combination of clout and success always made people attractive in Hollywood, and Loretta was a valued guest on the social circuit. That didn't make things easier for Tom. Loretta remembered an incident at a party hosted by Elsa Maxwell. She was a noted society hostess and would be in the future be named ambassador to Luxembourg by Harry Truman. The party she gave was for, I'm stopping a second, that there was a movie with Ethel Merman called Call Me Madam, and it was loosely based on Elsa Lancaster being a ambassador to some small country. And it's kind of a fun musical. Ethel Merman, Donald O'Connor, Vera Ellen. But anyway, a little side note. So back to Elsa's party. This party she gave was for some English people. She had the movie stars, Eddie Lamar, Loretta Young, Ingrid Bergman, and Joan Bennett, all at a table for 10 in the dining room with the Englishmen. Tom ended up in the third room at the table with the English wives, and that made him livid. In the middle of dinner, he came in and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Come on, we're leaving. I'll tell you why when we get outside." He looked at Elsa and said, "I'm sorry, we have to go." He pulled the chair back and took me by the hand. We got into the car and I asked, "What in God's name is the matter?" He said, "No one's going to put me back in third class." I looked at him and I thought, I better shut up. We went home and I got my makeup off and we went to bed as quickly as possible. Loretta continued, "It must have been impossible for a man like Tom to be married to a motion picture actress who got all the attention. If we walked into a restaurant and he made a reservation for Mr. Lewis and party, and the maitre d' said, 'Oh, Miss Young, come in,' and they gave us a much better table, Tom would ask, 'Now, is this the table you reserved for Mr. Lewis?' And invariably they said, 'Well, no.' And Tom would say, 'Well, we won't take it then. We will take the table you reserved for Mr. Lewis.' And we'd go back into the corner somewhere. So it spoiled the party, not only for him, but everyone else with us. And the maitre d' was embarrassed as well. I better recalled saying during a quarrel, 'Tom, you married me because I was Loretta. You wanted a movie star. You never went out with your secretary. You always went out with Glenda Farrell or Betty Davis or somebody. Somebody. So if you went with people like that, what did you think we were going to do if you married one of us? Not be what we are and just turn into your little slavey housewife? Why in God's name did you marry me? I'm a lead horse. That's the matter with us. We're both lead horses pulling in opposite directions." Nor had Tom fulfilled Loretta's preternatural dreams. She reflected. He was Irish and Welsh. It was a very difficult combination. His moods were very high or very low, and it was difficult for me to live with. My temperament is rather even, and it takes a lot for me to get up the courage to really blast somebody. And then I have to be so angry that I don't make any sense. I just don't like the feeling. I don't like arguing with Tom, and Tom loved to argue. I asked him one time, in any conversation with somebody else, if I'm disagreeing with them, why do you always take their side? "Oh," he said, "I don't think I do." I said, "Yes, always." Loretta's perspective about her relationship with Tom had shifted over the years. She explained, "I was probably in my mid-30s when I really decided that I wasn't wrong all the time. The first few years of our married life, I assumed that because he was older and he'd gone to college, he was smarter than I, and he wasn't. He wasn't at all. He knew the outer edges of things, but he never went to the core of anything. My whole drive was getting to the core, and the edges would fall where they may." A little PS here. I think part of the reason Loretta assumed that Tom was smarter in those early years of a marriage is because she really stopped going to school in the eighth grade. She was 13 years old. From that time on, she had tutors at the studio. Uh, but, but she, in retrospect, she didn't feel that they gave her a broad education. The Lewises sought counseling from a psychiatrist who told Tom, "You have to get an office. No woman can stand a man around the house all the time." Well, I wasn't in the house, but the children were, and so were the servants, and Tom was home all the time. There was always tension. So Tom opened an office in Beverly Hills. He had a private secretary who, by the way, couldn't stand me, so I don't know what he had been telling her. He paid her bills from the office. That's all I could figure out he did, and it was costing a fortune. And it really didn't solve the problem. I'm convinced that the basis of our unhappiness was the fact that I was the breadwinner. And when the children asked, "Daddy, what do you do?" he'd answer them testily, "What do you mean, what do I do? I go to the office every day." The Lewises were partners in several properties with Irene Dunn and her husband, Dr. Frank Griffin. Loretta reflected. Frank Griffin was a genius, and when Irene Dunn died, uh, she had an estate of $50 million. So Frank probably was a pretty smart guy. Where am I? Frank Griffin was a genius, and if Tom couldn't, if he had just gone along, but he wanted to be the boss, and he didn't know enough to be the boss. Frank Griffin Hills Hotel. And it was Tom's vote that got us all out. It was a gold mine, but he'd never seen that much money, and he was anxious to take his profits. It was a long time before Frank Griffith ever spoke to Tom again. Now, Loretta realized that she wasn't the mother she could have been. She reflected. What did she? I felt as good as a movie star can feel, who is not able to be around her children all the time. If I had grown up in a house where the mother wasn't there, then I wouldn't have known the difference. But I did know the difference. I grew up in a very secure home. Mama wasn't there. Even though she was running a boarding house, we were living in the boarding house and she was there. I knew what it should have been. Unfortunately, circumstances, most of the time, make up your mind for you. And it was the lesser of two evils which you choose. I was working as a successful actress making $300,000 a year. Tom, if he was lucky, might have made $50,000, and that's if he was working. It would have taken more guts than I had for most of those years to turn around to my husband and say, I'm going to quit, and we'll live on your $50,000 a year. Of course, Tom had no inclination to reduce his standard of living, and meanwhile, Loretta's career continued to soar. So to be continued. Oh, before I sign off though, when I was reading through this about the Doheny's and how they made their fortune in oil, there's a lot more to that Doheny story. So down the line, maybe I'll just have a podcast. Uh, you know, murder, suicide, some interesting things. So see you for the next podcast. Adios.